History of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth covers a period in the history of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. For the time their joint state became the theatre of wars and invasions fought on a great scale in the middle of the 17th century, to the time just before the election of Stanisław August Poniatowski, the last king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. For the 17th century, the nobles' democracy experienced devastating wars and fell into internal disorder and then anarchy, and as a result declined. The once powerful Commonwealth had become vulnerable to internal warfare and foreign intervention. In 1648, the Cossack Khmelnytsky Uprising engulfed the south and east of the vast Polish-Lithuanian state, and was soon followed by a Swedish invasion, which raged through core Polish lands. Warfare with the Cossacks and Russia left Ukraine divided. The eastern part, lost by the Commonwealth, became a dependency of the Tsardom of Russia, John III Sobieski, who fought protracted wars against the Ottoman Empire, revived the Commonwealth's military might once more. In one decisive engagement he helped in 1683 to deliver Vienna from a Turkish onslaught. Further disintegration followed nevertheless. The Commonwealth, subjected to almost constant warfare until 1720, suffered devastating population losses and massive damage to its economy and social structure. The economic regression had not been fully compensated for the duration of the Commonwealth's existence. The government became ineffective because of large-scale internal conflicts, corrupted legislative processes and manipulation by foreign interests. The nobility class fell under control of a handful of powerful families with established territorial domains. The urban population and infrastructure fell into ruin, together with most peasant farms. The reigns of two kings of the Saxon-Wettin dynasty, Augustus II the Strong and Augustus III, brought the Commonwealth more political damage and little meaningful reform. The Great Northern War, a period seen by the contemporaries as a passing eclipse, may have been the decisive blow that critically weakened the Polish-Lithuanian state. The Kingdom of Prussia became a strong regional power and took Silesia from the Habsburg monarchy. The Commonwealth Saxony Personal Union, however, gave rise to the emergence of the reform movement in the Commonwealth, and the beginnings of the Polish Enlightenment culture. Economic and social decline, war destruction, economic breakdown, social disintegration. The economic breakdown in the Commonwealth in the second half of the 17th century has often been seen as a result of the destruction of the country caused by wars. There were also other depressing factors present that affected at the time large portions of Europe, to which the manorial, serfdom-based economy of the Commonwealth had tried to adjust. The particular solutions adopted resulted eventually in deterioration of the effectiveness of agricultural practices, lower productivity and pauperization of the rural population. But the degree to which the economic regression in the Commonwealth had progressed had no parallels in the economies of the neighboring countries, some of which practiced the same type of rural economy. While the war destruction that took place during the events of 1655–60 was particularly devastating, the Commonwealth was subjected to constant warfare from 1648 to 1720. Unlike the previously fought wars, which had affected mostly the peripheries of the huge state, for the mid-17th century onward central Poland was being ravaged by warfare as well. The two northern wars turned out particularly destructive. Several massive foreign armies traversed the Commonwealth in the course of the Second Northern War. The protracted role of the country as a battlefield, the quartering of troops and armies, combined with the policy of exacting contributions and pillage during the Great Northern War, greatly deteriorated the economy of the country, which had not yet recovered from the damage incurred 2 generations earlier. Internal warfare and looting by unpaid Commonwealth troops added to the damage. The destruction and depletion of resources applied to all segments of the society, affecting rural villages, cities and towns, of which many had practically lost their urban character. Industry and manufacturing suffered, as well as the funds flowing into the state treasury. The war losses and epidemic disease outbreaks reduced the population by a third to 6 to 7 million. As the peasants, the townspeople and ordinary szlachta each lost their economic base, the magnate class had become the only social group capable of significant economic and political activity, which led to the more total domination of what was left of the Commonwealth politics. The war and economic pressures intensified the already present fragmentation processes and class conflicts between the social classes and within each of them. Xenophobia and intolerance became prevalent. Different social and territorial groups stressed the separate statuses and traditions. The nation-building efforts of Renaissance-era reformers was undone. Further stratification among nobility. The predominant 16th-century agricultural production organization, the Szlachta's Folwark, gave way by the middle of the 17th century to the magnate-owned latifunda, huge networks of landed estates. The latifunda were present throughout the Polish-Lithuanian Federation, but developed most extensively in the eastern reaches of the Crown, having expanded in that direction before the Union of Lublin. War destruction affected the diversified magnate possessions to a lesser degree than single estates of middle szlachta, which increasingly turned szlachta into dependent clients of their elder brothers. Parts of a latifundium were typically leased or run by hired szlachta or urban, or often Jewish, hierarchy of administrators, with each layer exploiting the serf laborers. The various aspects of commercial life in the territories, including agriculture, trade, mining, and manufacturing, had previously been controlled by szlachta in a legally protected way. Now, in the more decentralized and anarchistic feudal state, the magnate class was in a position to establish in its state-like domains absolute rule, based not on laws but on practical advantages they enjoyed. A regional authority and power that the magnates attained was exerted by a variety of means, including private military forces. The increased dominance of the magnates negatively affected the class integrity of the so far crucially important middle szlachta stratum. The fragmentation of szlachta deepened the decentralizing tendencies in the large state. The magnates established networks of szlachta supporters, and national loyalty was being replaced with loyalty based on regional ties. As for the nobility, the weak state institutions provided neither attractive career opportunities nor sufficient protection. The magnate control over the lesser petty szlachta, a group whose members possessed little or no property and were poorly educated, has long been recognized. The lesser szlachta was useful, as it provided crowds of armed men able to influence various public events, such as Sejmics or elections, according to directions given. Most commonly the basic clientele of the magnates constituted the lowest-ranked nobles, chinsonesi, free but landless and poor, whose status in reality resembled that of the peasants. They were completely dependent on a wealthy patron. The brukovci had no property and engaged in a variety of trades. Domestic szlachta functioned as servants in magnate family households. Szlachta Zasiankowa proper, or Zagradora, was the very numerous propertied petty nobility. Among the lower ranks they alone enjoyed something of a, at least symbolic, privileged noble status. Of fundamentally greater importance was the role of the middle nobility, propertied and better qualified people, able to pursue careers within magnate courts, or assume public offices obtained with the help of the magnate benefactors. The noblemen in question, through the magnates they served, experienced also material gains, such as profitable land leases, and legal protection in times of common and often reckless and disruptive litigation. The magnates themselves are magnate clans, formed groupings, or factions, with common regional or other interests. In the 17th century, the factions were usually confined to a region, such as the Lithuanian cliques of the Pakosapieta families. In the 18th century, the Czartoryskis and the Potokas established Commonwealth-wide magnate factions of great importance. The subordination to magnate interests took place not without some resistance, but the various Szlachta movements lacked coordination, and in the first half of the 18th century the middle nobility ceased being an independent force in national politics. The lack of legal distinction among various ranks of the nobility gave many noblemen a false sense of equality and opportunity. The majority of the nobility of the Lithuanian Rus, or German origin, had become Polonized and Catholic. Some minority Protestant nobility remained active in Royal Prussia and Greater Poland. After the triumph of the Counter-Reformation, the Jesuits and other Catholic educators lost incentives to provide competitive, high-quality education. The backward mentality and close-mindedness of the Szlachta masses has become proverbial, and as the nation experienced its greatest decline, the typically uniform Szlachta indulged in the Sarmatism ideology of a chosen nation and contempt for everything foreign. Non-conformity was not tolerated, corruption was at its highest, while public morale at the lowest. Among the more worldly of the magnates, influenced by foreign elements in the Commonwealth's royal courts and West European currents, admiration of foreign ways and fashions was becoming increasingly common. The magnates built splendid palaces of brick and stone in the main cities and on the rural estates. The wooden manners and feasting social life style of the Szlachta attempted to imitate the surroundings and lives of the rich, famous and powerful. Agricultural regression and peasantry. The deep agricultural crisis lasted from the 1650s through the 1720s. Under the plight of constant warfare and adverse economic conditions, the peasants were being increasingly burdened with excessive obligations. The communities suffered population losses and many villages disappeared altogether. The serf labor force was displaced and the plots taken over under estate consolidation schemes, or manorial duties were replaced by feudal rent arrangements if that seemed more profitable to landlords. Those and many other measures amounting to extreme exploitation and imposition of hardship had not resulted in increased production, but rather made the crisis more acute by ruining the peasant farming operation. Not all the regions suffered equally, as northern Poland's agriculture maintained moderate profitability, while southern Poland experienced the greatest rural decline, and correspondingly the greatest decrease in the percentage of farms under peasant family hereditary holding. After the Khmelnytsky Uprising and the Swedish deluge, approx. 35% of villages in Royal Prussia and 60% in Podolia were destroyed completely. The tendency was for each village, or a small cluster of villages, possibly corresponding to a parish, to function as a self-contained organism, arbitrarily ruled by the Lord's administrator, with some participation from a local self-government, whose continuous existence depended on its degree of cooperativeness. The parish schools taught mostly the catechism with added social indoctrination. The one allowed peasant activity, sometimes even required because of mandatory purchases of such staples as beer from the Lord's brewery, was the participation in village tavern life. The taverns provided some entertainment, functioned as outlets for significant folk artistic creativity, and places of occasional contacts with traveling representatives of the largely unknown to the peasants' outside world. Average living conditions in the increasingly impoverished rural villages were very bad, and the exploited peasants resorted to various forms of resistance, most often running away from particularly abusive landlords. Some villages or areas engaged in collectively refusing to perform the prescribed duties, or, rarely in ethnically Polish lands, armed rebellions. The Cossack Khmelnytsky Uprising took place in 1651. There were rebellions in the Podhale region in 1670 and in other regions in 1735–38. In Silesia, the ethnically Polish peasantry rebelled during 1722–29 and in 1750 around Pieszczyn, when the Prussian army was brought to bear. Highway robbery band activity was another form of peasant resistance. Some of its leaders, especially from mountainous regions, have become immortalized in folk tales. On a grand scale, peasant armed resistance became a crucial factor in the eastern Ruthenian lands of the Commonwealth, where it combined with Cossack unrest, disintegration of towns and urban classes. The fall of the cities and towns was the most pronounced aspect of the economic breakdown of the Commonwealth. The nascent manifestations of capitalist practices of the Renaissance era were weakened or wiped out, which irreversibly retarded the short and long-term aspects of economic development in absolute terms, or in comparison with Poland's neighbors, or even with Silesia and parts of Pomerania, areas lost by the crown. The peasants, who had traditionally constituted a vital part of the town merchants' clientele, now impoverished and forced by the feudal masters to limit the purchases to what was produced or sold within the home estate, largely stopped playing the role in the internal market. The market became confounded further by the monetary crisis, warfare, destruction, and the fact that some of the most major Poland's and Lithuania's municipal centers were lost to the neighboring states, either permanently or at times of reversals of military fortunes. The slow rebuilding after 1720 took place unevenly, with some of the largest cities, Warsaw and Danzig among them, faring the best, while other like Krakow, reduced to 10,000 inhabitants, remaining depressed. Most smaller towns suffered badly, except for those in West and Greater Poland, where the remarkable ascent of Wschowa took place. The changes altered the ethnic character of the burgher classes. The peasant influx into towns slowed to a trickle, while the proportion of Jewish inhabitants increased considerably. Of the 750,000 Jews living in the Commonwealth in the middle of the 18th century, three-quarters resided in cities, making up almost half of the total urban population. The Jews were very industrious, accepted even marginal profits, and soon dominated the crafts and trade, especially in smaller towns. The communities conducted extensive credit operations, servicing the Polish middle and upper social strata. Christian townspeople had made at times unsuccessful attempts to limit the commercial rights of the Jews. Some Polish cities had the non-tolerant Judaist privilege, which meant that they were able to exclude Jews from the area under the town's jurisdiction. Many Jews were often still able to remain within city limits, while others lived in juridicas, areas typically under feudal jurisdiction outside city walls. Jews also lived in shtetls, their own small countryside towns, existing under protection of a feudal lord. Jews usually functioned under the Jewish court system, subject to noble courts in case of conflict with municipal authorities or other Christians, and in appellate cases. The spatial separation was only partial, and in the Commonwealth there were no no formal ghettos. Jewish residents of cities participated in the upkeep of public infrastructure, and made other contributions, including to common military defense. The weakness of central government prevented an introduction of a uniform statewide economic policy, even as feeble attempts to implement mercantilism and state protectionism were being made. The balance of trade remained negative most of the time, and the country's transit role diminished. The lack of central controls opened the Commonwealth to exploitation by more advanced economies. The monetary crisis and chaotic policy in that area, as well as Frederick II's flooding of Poland with fake Polish currency, resulted in massive devaluations and economic losses, with the townspeople increasingly employed in agriculture, where there was demand for labor, the guildcrafts and manufacturing. The mainstay of the urban middle class became reduced to a fraction of its past capacity. However, the Commonwealth was able to preserve and rebuild much of the mining, metallurgy and heavier industries, some of which were important for military applications. Nationwide, the urban classes had become marginalized and lacked influence, as even by the end of the 18th century the population of town residents constituted no more than 15% of the Commonwealth's total. Most cities were private, as opposed to royal or public, with their inhabitants accordingly subjected to arbitrary obligations imposed by feudal owners. In the 18th century royal city of Krakow, 55% of the grounds within the city walls belonged to the church, 17% to nobility interests, and only the rest to the actual city folks. The degradation of towns was recognized as one of the leading factors contributing to national decline by the more enlightened of Szlachta publicists. The Commonwealth city populations were fragmented on the basis of trade, class, ethnicity, religious affiliation, jurisdiction type, and consumed by internal conflicts. The most enterprising and successful of burghers were able to join the ranks of nobility, thus leaving the urban occupations or introducing additional tensions within cities. Townspeople in larger cities, including Danzig, supported with dedication and generosity the national cause during the foreign invasions. The Commonwealth's urban upper layer had lost its previously prominent role in the promotion of cultural advancement, but in Silesia, where Polish gentry no longer existed, Protestant townspeople continued Polish language educational and cultural activities, including literary work and publications, in several cities. Toward the middle of the 18th century, the Polish and German burghers of Danzig, Thorn and other municipalities of Royal Prussia were among the pioneers of Polish Enlightenment. The typically parochial climate of ignorance, backwardness and prejudice in many small towns found its expression in a number of witch trials. Many magnate residencies were built and public improvement projects completed in Warsaw during the first half of the 18th century. Beginnings of recovery. The first changes indicating an upcoming economic recovery took place in the 1725–50 period. More clearly visible agricultural and industrial progress occurred during the two following decades and had to do with the improved by that time state of the agricultural market in Europe. During the earlier period, some technical advances were made and contributed to improved agriculture and, more importantly, the nature of rural social relations was changing, beginning in Poznan region and then elsewhere in West and Greater Poland and Royal Prussia. The manorial serfdom labor requirements were being replaced with peasant land rentals and owners collecting monetary compensation. This buying off of the forced labor obligations was often favored by the peasants themselves, as it improved their financial situation and reconnected them to city markets. The same two regions and the capital city of Warsaw experienced also a moderate awakening in the area of industrial activities and urban business enterprises. A major trading house was established in Warsaw by French Huguenots in 1723. Manufacturing businesses were created by a number of magnates in various regions. Among the most important was the developing iron industry in southern and central Poland. These modest signs of industrial progress occurred within the Commonwealth with a nearly half-century delay, not only in comparison to Poland's western and southern neighbors, but also with respect to Russia.